Bitcoin. It's not just a currency, it's a revolution. In just over a decade, it has created a trillion-dollar industry, transformed how we think about money, and sparked debates on everything from technology to economics. Governments have feared it, tech giants have embraced it, and investors have made and lost fortunes around it. The developer who created Bitcoin is anonymous, known only by a pseudonym, Satoshi Nakamoto. This person wrote the code, created the network, and launched the industry of cryptocurrency as we know it. And then he disappeared without a trace. No interviews, no press conferences, no photos, nothing. This developer could have been on the same level as these guys, but he chose a different path, and one that is quite admirable. This is a story of Satoshi Nakamoto, the developer of Bitcoin. How did he create it? Why did he create it? We'll find out in this video. But who exactly is he? We'll try and narrow it down to potential lists of suspects. But this person, who is probably one of the greatest software engineers of our time, is quite an enigma. This video is sponsored by Brilliant. More about it at the end of the video. The idea of cryptocurrency has been around for a while. It wasn't something that was entirely invented when Bitcoin came about. In 1983, American cryptographer called David Shom introduced the idea of digital money with strong privacy protections, which he called eCash. By 1995, he brought this concept to life with a system known as DigiCash. Users needed special software to withdraw digital notes from a bank, which were encrypted and assigned unique values before being sent. This made transactions private and untraceable by outside parties. And one would say that this was almost the beginning of the foundation of modern cryptocurrency. You see, the main advantage of cryptocurrency was that it was a form of currency that uses cryptography, secure coding, to actually secure transactions. If you look at traditional currencies like the dollar, the pound, the weak rand, they are managed by a central authority like a bank or a government, which is why long before Bitcoin was created, a lot of people weren't fans of traditional currencies and thought that there must be something better and more secure. So the idea of having cryptocurrencies operate on decentralized networks, that idea became popular. A decentralized network in this case is a global network of computers rather than a central authority like a bank or a government. In 1998, Nick Szabo, a computer scientist, developed the concept of BitGold. This was an early form of cryptocurrency which actually required users to solve computational puzzles, and the results were then cryptographically linked and stored. Now, by this stage, you're probably thinking, wow, BitGold seems a lot like the modern process of crypto. Well, you are correct. BitGold laid much of the groundwork for later cryptocurrencies. And in 2008, everything changed. On October 31st, 2008, a link to a paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, was shared on a cryptography mailing list. This paper outlined a revolutionary idea: a system for digital transactions that didn't require a central authority. And this paper was authored by an unknown developer who used the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. Then a few months later, on January the 3rd, 2009, the Bitcoin network officially launched when Satoshi Nakamoto mined the very first block of Bitcoin. Before we actually discuss who Satoshi might be, I'm going to explain this paper and explain how Satoshi set up the Bitcoin network, because it is quite interesting and gives you an idea of what Satoshi wanted and who Satoshi was as a person. So Satoshi starts the paper off with an introduction which details the issues with current online payments at the time. Most online payments rely on banks and financial institutions to act as the middleman. So these trusted third parties process the payments and handle any sort of dispute or issues. Now, Satoshi didn't like that, and he goes on to explain the downsides of this. Number one is that the payments can be reversed, which means that the sellers can lose money, especially if there's fraud or any sort of dispute happening. Number 2 is that there is also a high cost to online payments. The bank usually adds cost when it comes to resolving any disputes or just processing the payments. And lastly, and probably the biggest disadvantage, is that when it came to online payments, there was a lack of privacy. Merchants often asked for extra customer information to protect themselves, such as the customer address, phone number, social security or identity numbers, and so on. And this can feel invasive to the customer. And in this paper, Satoshi made a really good point. He said that in person, cold, hard cash doesn't rely on trust. Once the money is handed over, the transaction is final. But there's no digital equivalent for online payments, and that was a major issue. He noted that Bitcoin introduced a way for two people to send money to each other directly without involving any banks or financial institution. Instead of relying on banks to verify the payments, the Bitcoin system can use cryptographic techniques, complex mathematics, to ensure that the transactions are secure and that it can't be reversed in a fraudulent manner. He did note that one of the challenges of digital money is that there is a risk of someone spending the same money twice. For example, if digital money was just a file, someone could make a copy of that file and send it twice. This is known as double spending. Bitcoin solves this by introducing a distributed network of computers known as peer-to-peer networking. And essentially what this does is that it enables Bitcoin system to be more secure because it doesn't rely on a single authority. Instead, it relies on a global network of computers. And as long as most of the network is honest and has more computing power than a group of attackers, the system remains safe. And that's the idea of Bitcoin. Most of the paper goes through how Bitcoin will work. Think of Bitcoin like a chain of digital signatures. When you own a Bitcoin, what you have is a right to spend it. So imagine that I want to send 1 Bitcoin to James. So I use my Bitcoin wallet to create a transaction. And this transaction includes things like the sender's information, i.e. my info. So this would just be proof that I actually own that 1 Bitcoin. And this is done using my private key to sign the transaction. The transaction will also include the receiver's info, so James's Bitcoin address, so the network knows who it should send the Bitcoin to. And lastly, you have to know the amount, which is 1 Bitcoin. So when I send Bitcoin to someone else, I sign ownership using that key. This creates a new link in the chain of ownership. And once I send the transaction, my wallet broadcasts it to the Bitcoin network. And now this transaction is waiting to be processed. But here's a problem. How does the system know that you haven't secretly made 2 transactions with the same Bitcoin? This is called the double spending problem. And it's a main challenge that Satoshi and Bitcoin solved. So in traditional banking, the bank ensures that no double spending happens because they keep a ledger of all transactions. There's a history. Now, Bitcoin obviously doesn't use a bank. Instead, it uses a public ledger called the blockchain. And everyone in the network can see the blockchain. The blockchain is essentially a database of records that holds all Bitcoin transactions in chronological order. So once I send the transaction, my wallet broadcasts this to the network. The Bitcoin network consists of computers called nodes that actually share and validate the transactions. And when you think of nodes, just think of them as auditors. All they do is they just check that I have the 1 Bitcoin to spend and that I haven't spent it anywhere else. If the transaction is valid, it's now added to a mempool, which is a waiting room for unconfirmed transactions. And now my transaction is sitting in a pool with a bunch of other unconfirmed transactions. And this is where we enter the stage of Bitcoin mining and proof of work. So a miner is a specialized computer, and these computers essentially do the heavy lifting in the Bitcoin network. Miners are basically workers who add blocks to the blockchain and they get rewards, while the nodes are auditors who just check if the transactions are valid. So once my transaction is sitting in this lobby with others, it is waiting for a miner to select it. And a miner will pick a set of transactions from the mempool. The miner then organizes these transactions to form a block. And ideally, the process here is to take a block and add it to more blocks. Why? Well, once a block is added to more blocks, then this blockchain becomes tamper-proof. Because if someone wants to change a transaction, they would have to redo the work for every block that comes after it as well, which is nearly impossible. You won't be able to go in and alter just one transaction to be sent to the address because the nodes would pick it up. they are the auditors. So to change one transaction, an attacker would need to redo all the work for that one block and every block after it, basically remining the entire blockchain faster than all the honest miners combined. And this is nearly impossible because it would actually require immense computing power and time. So essentially, Satoshi designed Bitcoin to be quite simple. It's a decentralized system for transferring value, and it's secured by cryptography. It provides a level of security and transparency that no other system can match. And that was Satoshi's foundation of Bitcoin. That was what was important to him. So who is he, and why hasn't he claimed his fame? Throughout this video, I kept saying that Satoshi Nakamoto is one person, one man. But in actual fact, nobody knows if Satoshi is actually one person or group of people, or a man or a woman. But here's what we know for sure. Satoshi made the first major move on the 18th of August 2008 by registering a domain name called bitcoin.org. A website was then set up with that address very shortly after. Then, a few months later, October 2008, Satoshi actually published the now famous white paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. This was shared on a cryptography mailing list called metsdoud.com. Then we fast forward to January 2009. This is where Satoshi launched the Bitcoin network by releasing 0.1 of the Bitcoin software on SourceForge. This step also included the creation of the Genesis block, which is block number 0 of the blockchain. And this marked the official start of Bitcoin. Satoshi did work closely with other developers on Bitcoin software, and he personally handled all the updates and modification on the Bitcoin software up until mid-2010. During this time, he was also an active contributor to the discussions on the Bitcoin forums. And this is where he engaged with the Bitcoin community to just help shape the product. So around mid-2010, this is where Satoshi actually began stepping back from the project. He handed over the control of the Bitcoin source code repository and the critical network alert key to a developer called Gavin Anderson, and he became a prominent figure in the Bitcoin community. Satoshi also transferred related domains to trusted members of the community. And this just ensured that Bitcoin's decentralization would just continue even if he was not there. Now, in interviews, Gavin Anderson did describe how Satoshi started to step away as project leader and actually started to encourage others, including Anderson himself, to take on more of the leadership responsibilities. And this gradual retreat almost added to the mystery of who Satoshi was. Satoshi's last post on the forums was in December 2010, and then he left without a trace. It's almost like he disappeared into thin air. There was no official goodbye. There was an incident in 2014 where he sent emails from an old account, and there was some random post as well. But this was likely his email account being hacked more than anything. But other than that, the Bitcoin founder seemed to be a ghost. And once people realized that he may never reveal himself, the theories to who he may be started to surface. So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? This question has actually baffled people for years, and the hunt for answers has led to some fascinating theories, which I'll go through. There's a few things to note. Satoshi never revealed personal details when he was discussing Bitcoin. He generally focused purely on technical and philosophical ideas. The name Satoshi Nakamoto sounds Japanese, but many have doubted that he was Japanese. He spoke in fluent English. He also used British spelling, like color, and used phrases like bloody hard. So this theory is that he may in fact be British or of some Commonwealth origin. I did mention Satoshi used to post on forums. He used to post on the P2P forums as well. And if you look at his profile, he claimed in 2012 that he is a 37-year-old man living in Japan. But again, this may not be true. Some people say that the sheer brilliance of the Bitcoin code can't be actually attributed to one person and more likely is a team of people. A developer named Laszlo Honiak, who exchanged emails with Satoshi, he noted that the code often seemed too polished, making it impossible for just one individual to do. There is a Swift engineer called Stephen Thomas who analyzed Satoshi's forum posts and all the timestamps. And he found that Satoshi was consistently inactive between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. GMT, even on weekends. That's midnight to 6 a.m. in New York, or 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. in Japan. And this would be a curious sleeping pattern for someone living in Japan. So this fueled the idea that Satoshi may have been operating and living somewhere in the West. So who are the actual suspects? Who could be Satoshi? One of the strongest candidates is Hal Finney. He was a brilliant photographer and one of the first people to use Bitcoin. Finney did work closely with Satoshi during the early days of Bitcoin, doing things like filing bug reports and suggesting improvements. Adding to this mystery, Hal actually lived a few blocks away from a man named Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. So could he have borrowed his neighbor's name as a pseudonym? Writing analysis also showed that Hal's writing style was the closest to Satoshi's. However, there was a Forbes journalist who actually met with Hal and reviewed his emails and wallet records. And the journalist actually concluded that Hal, in fact, wasn't Satoshi, but may just have been deeply involved in the conception of Bitcoin. Now we have candidate number 2. In 2014, there was a Newsweek journalist who claimed that Dorian Nakamoto, a Japanese-American physicist, was actually the real Satoshi. So the journalist pointed out that Dorian had a background in classified government projects and had libertarian views. And when confronted with this, Dorian allegedly said, "I am no longer involved in that and I cannot discuss it." And there was media chaos, reporters camping outside his home, etc., etc. But later on, Dorian actually denied everything, explaining that he had just misunderstood the questions. Candidate number 3 and another leading theory is Nick Szabo, who was the creator of BitGold, the precursor of Bitcoin. Again, writing style analysis actually suggests that Szabo's writing closely matched Satoshi's. And obviously Szabo had quite deep knowledge of cryptocurrency and cryptography given his background, and that made him a prime suspect. However, Szabo has actually repeatedly denied that he is Satoshi, even stating, "I'm afraid you got it wrong, doxing me as Satoshi." Candidate number 4 is Len Sassaman. Len Sassaman was a highly respected American technologist and cryptographer. He had significant contributions, including his work on PGP encryption and remailer technology. These were all innovations that align with Bitcoin's vision. Sassaman also had close ties with influential figures like Hal Finney, who was the first person to receive a Bitcoin. Adding to the story, Sassaman unfortunately passed away in July 2011, just a few months after Satoshi Nakamoto disappeared from the public view in April the same year. So the timing alone has even fueled speculation about his potential connection. There was also a guy called Craig Wright, who is an Australian computer scientist, and he was the first well-known figure who actually claimed to be Satoshi in 2015. He backed his claims with emails, documents, and even court cases. However, his story actually unraveled because experts found inconsistencies and even forged evidence. It ended up in court. In fact, in 2024, a UK judge declared that Craig Wright is not the author of the Bitcoin white paper and confirmed that he actually lied in court. So he is probably the only one in the list who we know for sure isn't Satoshi. Could Satoshi be one of these 4 developers? Possibly. Would he ever out himself? At this stage, no. The theory that makes the most sense to me is that Satoshi is probably not here with us anymore, or is just someone who wants to stay away from public. From the list, I think the most likely people to be Satoshi is either Hal, who unfortunately passed away in 2014, but Hal did receive the first public transaction. And in true developer fashion, when you build a platform, the first thing you do is you test it on yourself. So he could actually be the one to send the first Bitcoin transaction to himself. The other person who it may be is Len Sassaman. Sassaman was an expert in cryptography and remailers. He's also worked alongside Hal Finney, who actually received that first Bitcoin transaction. Interestingly, even though he was American, he was based in Europe and wrote in British English, and unfortunately he had some health problems and ended his life around the same time that Satoshi disappeared. Those are probably the two main leading theories. There are conspiracy theories that say that Bitcoin may be created by the government or the CIA. That's often a popular one. And the other one is that Bitcoin is just created by a bunch of anonymous software engineers or developers. I don't think we'll ever know for sure. If Satoshi is alive and if he wanted to be in the public, he would have done so by now. In fact, he still has quite a lot of Bitcoin. As of 2021, Nakamoto is estimated to own between 750,000 to 1.1 million in Bitcoin. If someone claimed that they are Satoshi, it's actually really easy to prove. Satoshi mined the very first Bitcoin, the Genesis block, and other blocks that followed. So the person claiming to be Satoshi, all that they would need to do was actually just move a tiny fraction of those early Bitcoins or sign a message using the private key of one of those addresses. Very simple to prove, but it hasn't been done yet. And I don't think it will ever be done. Do we even need to know the real identity of Satoshi to appreciate the genius of the creation? Because the mystery surrounding Satoshi has become an integral part of Bitcoin's story, and unveiling it might actually take away from that. In many ways, having an anonymous creator of Bitcoin fits Bitcoin's mission. And I actually hope that Satoshi's identity remains a secret forever. Thank you so much for Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Here's more on it. I just wanted to say thanks for today's sponsor, Brilliant. If you don't know, I've been using Brilliant for a while now. So it was almost ironic when they reached out to sponsor this video. Last year, I realized something. Scrolling through social media for hours, probably not the best habit. I thought surely there had to be something better out there. I wanted to use my time to actually learn something useful and not be a couch potato, which is why I like Brilliant. Brilliant makes learning hands-on. Whether it's science, programming, or math, you're not just reading, you're solving real-world problems. A few months back, I thought, oh, I have an engineering degree, but I'm in data analytics, so it would be cool to refresh some engineering concepts. And in the science topics, you learn to think like an engineer as you design electric circuits and gear systems. It's pretty cool. I really enjoyed it because it does feel like you're playing a game. And you also feel better about yourself because you're no longer aimlessly scrolling through social media and learning nothing. You're building a daily habit that keeps your noggin alive. So if you ever wanted to explore topics like science, programming, and math, try Brilliant. It's great. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free, for a full 30 days, go to brilliant.org/codingwithdee, or you can click on the link in the description. You also get 20% off an annual subscription. Thanks again, Brilliant. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.